further ado, Doc.
Thank you. How are we at? How am I in sound? Is this good? Yeah? Cool. Cool. So this is, I think, my third time at this conference. And I think in the first one I talked about agile practices, and then actually the next one was Path to Craftsmanship, and Cheesy and I did a presentation on inside out and outside in testing. And now this one is a little bit different from both of those. So it's not really a talk entirely on Agile, although you're going to see a lot of kind of the Agile values and philosophies and thinking in here. And as Mike was just talking about these 20-minute talks, you know, what's a problem that you faced? What did you try? What did you learn? If I'd known about those, I could have condensed this to 20 minutes and saved everyone a lot of time. Basically, this is a story of things that we have experienced and are continuing to experience at Groupon as we go through a change. And in order to kind of set the stage, I have to go back in time a little bit. I want to tell you a little bit about Groupon and kind of how it came to be. So most folks don't know, in 2007, it actually started as a company called The Point. And The Point was this concept, a social media company, and the idea was to get groups to unite to solve common social problems, right? So, you know, it might be people in your local neighborhood, but it might be people around the world, something that you have passion around, and you'd like to work with others to try and find solutions. And in 2008, something interesting happened on The Point. There was a group of people who used it to form a collective in order to get group buying power. So the problem they were trying to solve wasn't really what we intended the platform to be for, but this started to take off. And within a year, even less than a year, this was actually one of the highest uses of The Point for all of APAC, and was starting to actually catch on in the US. And the shareholders looking at this saying, hey, we think something is happening here. There's something interesting about this idea of group buying. What could we do with it? So in November of 2008, Groupon was born. And this, believe it or not, is the original logo and insignia for Groupon. A very mature company, as one can tell, right? So at that time, there were 10 employees at Groupon, and that was pretty much the entirety of The Point, kind of moving over to this new concept, this new idea. Fast forward just a couple of years, it's 2010, and there's 300 employees, a little bit more than 300 employees. And suddenly the concept of Groupon took off. And by 2012, there were over 10,000 employees in the company. Right? This is unprecedented growth. As far as I know Groupon at one point was claiming that we were the fastest growing company in history. And that was based both on revenue and headcount. I think that's still true. I haven't checked the stats lately. Now, how do we do this, right? How does a company grow that fast? Well, it turns out that acquisition was a key part of our growth strategy. And fundamentally, the reason that we did it was, one, we had determined that there was a market, right? And we had determined that we could actually serve that market. So we knew we had a viable business idea. We knew that this could be done. But if you knew of Groupon in 2009, 2010, what you also probably had in your mind was, I could do that. And the truth was, anyone could do that. So how do you dominate that market? How do you ensure your livelihood? Well, the only way to do it is to grow faster than anyone else possibly could. It's basically just take it over before somebody else did. So as all of these kind of Groupon clones popped up, we would look at these markets and we would say, okay, there's 3 or 4 in this market over here. This group's winning, buy them. Then we would put our sales force to work and basically take over that section of the market. within those 2 years, we ended up with major development centers in, obviously, the US, in Brazil, in Chile, in Germany, in India. And because it was acquisition, we were on different languages, different platforms, different teams with different practices. There were over 1,000 engineers in the company, most of whom had never met one another, and most of whom had not gone through some kind of a orientation, here's the Groupon way. So you can imagine what this environment was kind of like. Today, global domination, right? We're still on 8 or so major platforms. We're in 48 different countries, 400 million deals, and there's 40 million active customers. There's actually a lot more customers than that in the database, but there's approximately 40 million that are active. So why do I tell you all of this? Well, actually, I'll give you a little more. So we're not just daily deals anymore. That's what people know us for. But we actually have freebies, we have getaways, we have goods, we have grassroots, we have live, we have reserve, obviously mobile and web. There's also point of sale systems, there's payment gateways, there's scheduling systems. So we have a very wide variety of offering across, and it's distributed across all of these major teams, right? Now, this is what we want you to see. This is what Groupon looks like, or what we hope that it looks like. It's well put together, it's well designed, it's very modular. This is what it feels like behind the scenes. Right, there's different teams working on different pieces in different offices with different practices in different countries on different platforms with different local leadership. Right? This system is Conway's Law. It is the prototypical example of Conway's Law. Right? How many of you are familiar with Conway's Law? All right, so Conway's Law. Organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structure of that organization. So, however your organization is put together, where there's communication failure, that is where you will have system failure. These two modules don't communicate well together. If you look behind the scenes, those two teams don't communicate well together. And this is not only true for software, this is true for all systems. When Conway actually first wrote this axiom, he was actually talking about the manufacturing of military equipment. And later, it turned out that we found, hey, this actually applies to software. And it was in the Mythical Man month that this axiom became noted as Conway's Law. So with this, you can anticipate that these things start to happen much more often than we would like them to happen. Different teams, different cities, different leadership, different platforms. None of these folks have really talked or met each other, right? What happens in this kind of an environment? When you talk to engineers at Groupon, when you sat down and you actually chatted with them, they all knew who the enemy was. And the enemy was us. They weren't talking about our competitors. They weren't talking about the market space. They were talking about that team over there, those people in that country. They were talking about the front end versus back end, right? We were pointing fingers at one another. We were not united towards some end. We had this monolithic code base. In the US, we were basically on one large code base that was all written in Rails, and it scaled. So if anyone says Rails can't scale, there's definitive proof that it can. But we wrote it so quickly that it just became this humongous monolith, right? You couldn't make changes. We had done a major redesign attempt, and it completely failed. People were demoralized. The company was unhappy with our inability to actually innovate and move forward. There were a lot of frustrated employees. There was just basically a lack of trust. And we wanted to solve this problem. We wanted to figure out how do we get these people united. And there's clearly a quality problem here. We've got all these 404 issues and all these other things that are going on. So what do we do? And the first call was for compliance. Tell them what to do. We'll get our VPs together. We'll put them in a room. Maybe we'll call in a few of those architect folks. We'll allow a senior director or two in because maybe they're worthy of the time. And we will draft the commandments, and we will determine what is the Groupon way, and we will push that down to the masses, and they will comply. How many of you have had this happen in your organization in some form or another? And for how many of you was it a raging success? It doesn't work, right? People want a voice. They want to be involved. So in my frustration, I tweeted this: focus on compliance and get complacency. And it's true. If we focus on compliance, making sure that they're following the rules, making sure they're doing it the way that we told them to do it, we get complacency. We are taking people's power away from them. But if you focus on connection, you can get consistency. As people build empathy for one another, as people begin to understand each other, as it becomes harder to actually say, that team over there, because you now know Sarah, who's the lead engineer on that team, and she's actually pretty smart, and she's kind of frustrated with the situation. And the reason they did this thing was because. Deming tells us the greatest waste is failure to use the abilities of people to learn about their frustrations and about the contributions that they're eager to make. Right? It's easy to dismiss people as apathetic or lazy or however you want to actually characterize them. You can turn, to explain away their lack of contribution, right? To explain away their lack of passion as something that is personal about them. It's their fault. If they would just suck it up, if they would just care a little bit more, right, then that's what we need. In fact, let's top grade the organization. Let's get rid of all of those people who are lazy. But this is actually an apathetic and lazy form of leadership. To lump people into these groups, to not look into why is this happening. So what we decided to do instead was go and talk to them. Let's go talk to the engineers. Let's go talk to our product owners. Let's talk to these people and find out what's going on. We started with something really simple. We started with retrospectives on some major projects. Whether they were deemed successful or they were deemed failures by the business, we actually started doing not just the 2-week iteration type stuff, but actually, let's do a timeline on the entire project, and let's really talk about what happened here and what lessons could we learn. And this is a word cloud from one of the retrospectives. We asked everyone to give a single word that summed up the retro for them, or for the entire experience for them, right? And right in the middle, we see successful and we see teamwork. And if you look at this, just right at that, basically take it for surface, you're like, yes. Successful teamwork. Good job. What's around this? Hectic, anticlimactic, rushed, mission creep, disconnect, unsustainable, flaky, frantic, right? Exhausting, furious. So underneath that sense of, woohoo, we did it, we finished this, and there wasn't maybe a whole lot of wahoo, was all of this expression of frustration that was bubbling up from these teams. So then we actually went out and we did one-on-one interviews with folks. So I traveled to Chennai. I did video calls with folks in Berlin. I spent time in Chicago. I spent time in Palo Alto. We pulled in folks from all over the globe and talked to them in one-on-one sessions. And these sessions were really, really simple. I would introduce myself. I would introduce what we were doing, right? Just basically saying, hey, we're trying to get a sense of what it's like to work here at Groupon, from your perspective, all of the data that you give us is anonymous. We're going to only share aggregated information. We will never call out any individual's name. In fact, as I'm taking the notes, I have nothing in here that indicates who's speaking. By the time I'm done with my sessions here in Chennai, I will have talked with 40 different engineers. There's no way I'm going to remember which one said what, right? After that intro, I asked them 2 questions. So how do you find it here? And what else? Those are the only 2 questions I asked. And the rest of the time, I took copious notes. For each of the offices, we then did another tag, word cloud, and we did some other aggregations, and we shared that back with the leadership in the office. And the conversations often went something like this. So your engineers indicate that they don't have the freedom to move from one team to another. That's patently false. Okay. Your engineers feel that they don't have the freedom to move from one team to another. That's patently false. No, they do feel that way. And until they feel differently, it is their truth. So we can either tell them, you're wrong, or we can do something else that shows them that they are able to make this move, right? And it was different topics for each location maybe, but this conversation kind of happened across the board. And so started changing the thinking. How do we actually let them, how do we change their perception, right? There are a lot of common concerns that came out of this. One was, we may have a couple of too many top priorities. Right? Everything was top priority, so then nothing is top priority, and no one knows what they're supposed to do. Way too much red tape. Monolithic code base. We had gone from being able to make code changes on a daily basis, if not even more often, to a week, to 2 weeks, to maybe a month. Everything took longer. There were more checkpoints. It was just a lot harder to get stuff done. It was harder to get things, to get financial approval for things, et cetera. Servers. You used to be able to just requisition a server like that, and now it took weeks, and there was all this rigmarole around it, right? Some management issues. Those relationships weren't always really healthy. And there were a lot of reasons for this. Some of it was just simply that because we grew so fast, maybe we took a really good lead engineer and we promoted them to a management position, but we didn't give them the training. Or maybe we acquired a company and then took the manager from that company and put them in charge of some completely different team full of people they didn't know in a domain they didn't know and expected them to deliver really quickly. And so they did what they could to try and get rapid delivery from a team that they're not familiar with in a domain they're not familiar with. Right? So there were different reasons for this. This was your typical career path. Very difficult to navigate. No clear picture of how you get promoted or what you get promoted for or how you can move around. And obviously this led people to feel like they were stuck, right? They were stuck in a particular role. They were unable to actually move things forward. And we had a lack of communication. Even people that were supposedly working together had become kind of disengaged. And then we did, we've always done these employee engagement surveys. So these come out they used to come out on a quarterly basis. We're actually doing them less often now. And they would tell us, oh, hey, morale's pretty low in engineering. But the challenge with these was, well, one, the feedback loop was way too long. We were doing them once a quarter, and it took a month to amass the data. And then the way that it got shared was at a very large kind of aggregated scale, right? So you didn't get a lot of valuable information out of it other than, people don't seem to be feeling real good. So we knew we wanted to address these issues, but we also wanted to make sure that we knew that we were actually addressing them, that we were making a difference. Right? We wanted some way of measuring this change effort. So the first thing we did was we introduced the check-in. Now the check-in is a survey that we send to everyone in engineering. It started in Chicago, that's where it was piloted. It is now a global survey. And it is based on, I'm gonna forget the name of it now. There are 12 key questions in this. And they are scientifically designed to assess employee engagement. And we looked at a bunch of different models and decided this was actually the one that we wanted to go with. There are a few reasons for it. One, 12 questions is really easy to answer. It doesn't take long at all. All of them can be answered on a Likert scale from I strongly agree to this to I strongly disagree to this. Right? And we did a 6-point scale, so there was no meh in the middle. You had to actually say you agreed to some extent or you disagreed to some extent. Man, losing that is really a bummer. Thank you. So as we get this information back, we actually share histograms of the responses, right? And all of this data is anonymized. I'm actually the only individual in the organization, and there's one person in HR that can see who responded what. The only reason we can see who responded what is so that we can do some roll-ups to provide to management to let them know what's going on. So these histograms are shared where we actually show, here's the entire organization's results, and then I'll show the senior vice presidents, the vice presidents, directors, and engineering managers all the way down. And here's how your org compares to the overall. All right, so you can kind of see, all right, you know, how am I doing compared to kind of the overall? And then we actually started showing trending over time. So, you know, is it getting better? Is it getting worse? And this dot graph, the way that it works is big blue up right is good, small red down and left is not good. Right? So we can actually show how is this trending over time. So we can see, are we moving the needle on these items? And then we have some dashboards that just show like an overall, what's our rating. And we use this data to inform us, both about what are things that are going on, you know, as well as are we actually moving the needle on stuff. Then we decided, you know, we need to put a concerted effort around this. So far, what's been happening is, you know, we're doing these interviews, we're making some small changes in offices, but we need to actually put something together where there's a team that is dedicated to moving this initiative forward. It shouldn't be a sideline thing. So we founded Team Ethos, ETHOS, Engineering Traditions, Habits, Operations, and Standards. It's a little bit of a stretch, but it works. Team Ethos, our charter is to focus on improving engineering culture. For us, that really ultimately means that we are both attracting and retaining top talent, with retention being the most important part of this, right? And I actually lead this team. So as we started thinking about how do we want to approach this, we need to come up with some kind of a framework or some kind of a strategy for, you know, how do we actually go about doing this? It would be really easy to just look at each individual problem and try and solve each individual problem. Or once the team was formed, frankly, a flood of emails came in, everything from, you know, we need to automate all the things to please give me a pony. So stepping back and thinking about it for a little while, we said, all right, we got to put a framework around this. So we're going to focus on three things, three key things. First is autonomy, the ability to choose your own path. Now, autonomy, in my mind, is both about individual and team, right? So autonomy as it pertains to the individual, it's about having a voice in the decisions that actually impact your work life. And the freedom to choose a different course. As it pertains to a team, to the collective, it's the right to self-organize and self-govern. So you decide how the team is actually formed, and you decide what your internal rules are for this team. In a corporate environment, ultimately, autonomy means pushing the decisions down to the people that actually do the work. The next thing, and many of you in the audience are going to guess right now that the next thing is mastery. No, it's not. It's connection. So the next thing we want to focus on is connection. And this is both internal and external. Right? Connection is what makes a community. Our engineering department needed and still needs cohesion within each team and across the entire organization. But not from a top-down, here's how you shall do it, thou shalt not, but developing a collective agreement on how we operate and what we do, right? Grassroots supported from the top. Externally, Groupon engineering needs to increase the technical community's awareness of who we are and what we do. Right? So there's connection both internally and to the community. And then the last one is excellence. And excellence is about personal mastery and the quality of the product that we produce. So it's about your individual ability to actually grow your skills, to advance in your career, right? And it's also about making sure that the product that we produce meets our quality standards, our goals, right? In order to get there, everyone, every individual and every team has to be adequately challenged, and they've got to be able to see the progress towards that goal. And those two things are actually really important. You need to be adequately challenged, not over, not under, and you need to be able to see progress towards a goal. You need to be able to see that things are actually changing, things are happening. So, autonomy, connection, excellence, right? But we're not going to attack them necessarily in this order, because as we looked at this, we started thinking about, well, what is it that we need? How are we going to achieve this? What do we need to do? So we mixed it up a little bit. We said, you know what, we're going to start with connection. We're going to start by folding the social graph. We are going to start by getting people to know one another better, by building that empathy within the organization. Through those connections, we're able to spread excellence. And from that excellence, we are able to earn autonomy. And if earning autonomy offends you, I understand. But in an organization where the power is at the top, we've got to find a path to building the trust that allows the power to be where it should be, right? So I mentioned earlier that some of you would probably look at this and say, well, isn't this autonomy, mastery, purpose, right? Didn't you just steal this from Dan Pink and then rename it? The truth is, yeah, I stole some of it from Dan Pink. And Dan Pink stole it from others, right? He's not the research scientist that came up with this. He read a bunch of studies and said, hey, but it wasn't just Dan Pink that I stole it from. There were a few others involved. Now, right now, if I had to say, what are the books that you should read, there are many excellent books in here. I very much like Drive. I think that the studies that Pink refers to and the conclusions that he's drawn are pretty spot on. My challenge with Pink's work is that autonomy, mastery, and purpose speak specifically to the individual. How am I motivated? And they don't speak to a collective. They don't speak to the team. They don't speak to an organization. And if you look at The Connected Company, Dave Gray, and there's a couple of others in here, but I would say, this is probably one of the key ones. Talks a lot more about the collective. Actually, you know what? Leaders Eat Last. Sinek also talks about this. And talks about the science behind it, right? And how we are inherently social creatures. That if you look at us from a physical standpoint, there is no reason that we dominate the world. There is no reason that we are the top of the food chain, except that we are the only creatures on Earth who can unite in the way that we do. And it turns out that biochemically, we are conditioned to work together as teams. We are conditioned to work together in units. Another favorite right now that I think is an excellent read is actually Turn the Ship Around. This book, L. David Marquette, he was a commander in the Navy, and he was assigned a sub, a nuclear sub, and you get your assignments, 6 months in advance, if not longer. And so during that 6-month period, he studied everything there was about that sub. He studied how the engines worked. He studied the missile rooms. He studied all of the controls. He learned about every single member of the staff that was going to be on that ship. And why did he do this? Well, he did this because the Navy is a command and control organization. There is someone in charge, and everyone knows who that is. And if you are going to be in charge like that, you better know every damn thing there is to know about what you're doing. So for 6 months, he studied everything he could about that sub and that crew. And 2 weeks before the assignment, he received a letter saying, "Sorry, dude, we're going to give you a different ship. Oh, and a different crew. Oh, and by the way, it's the worst ship and crew in the Navy. So good luck with that." So he arrives knowing nothing about the engine room, nothing about the missile silos, nothing about the crew. Their journeys are usually 6 months long. And you got no place to go. It's you and the crew. And over that 6-month period, he learned how to run that ship very, very effectively without knowing all of the fine details. So this is a really good story about a command and control officer who learns how to become truly a servant leader. He graduated so many officers off of that ship over the course of time that eventually the Navy started to pay attention, and they have changed their training policies and the way that they command ships based on L. David Marquette's experience on that boat. Fantastic book. The last one, Scaling Up Excellence. This is a relatively new release from Bob Sutton. And in this, he's basically talking about patterns that organizations have used to grow excellence within the company. Right? So these are kind of the books. All of these influence the thinking. If you're looking for a few, those are the few that I would recommend. So we saw a bunch of different problems that folks had, right? And basically what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to walk through things that we are doing or that we are trying or that we have put in place to help improve the environment. And I encourage you, ask questions, call bullshit, whatever you want to do, right? Welcome to have a conversation. This is an ongoing thing. I'm learning from this as it goes. Some of these things that I'm going to show you, maybe in 6 months, they're going to flame out, and I'll come back next year and say, hey, by the way, don't do that thing. So the first thing we did was pretty simple. We put in an internal transfer procedure. So you remember I was talking about how in the one office, the engineers felt they couldn't move, and management said that's patently false. So all we did was we drafted a document, not a policy, a procedure. If you want to transfer to another team, here's how you do it. You contact that team. You talk to them. You talk to that manager. Right? You talk to your manager. You negotiate a timeline for handoff. There's a couple things in this procedure that I think were key. No request can be denied. It is not a matter of if. It is only a matter of when. So now engineers understood, oh yeah, I really can move. Because what turned out to be the problem was that you would go to your manager and say, hey, you know what, I'm really interested in this project over here. I'd like to move to that team. And your manager says, now's not a really good time. and that's the end of the conversation. Well, not now is forever. So the real conversation just needed to be when? How do we get there? How do we make that happen? Right? So we put that in place. And yes, there was a flurry of moves, and then it kind of settled down. But now as people want to move, they know that they can. The next thing we put in place was career ladders. Now, if you read my blog, you know how I feel about career ladders, but they are better than nothing, right? So now people know, oh, I'm in this role. If I want to move to this role, here's the behaviors I need to exhibit. And now all of a sudden, annual reviews and other things actually start to make a little bit more sense. I understand what criteria I'm being evaluated on. Then we started looking at this issue of red tape and complexity. One of the problems was if you were new to Groupon, as an engineer, you got your laptop, and it had basically a clean install on it. And we said, all right, set it up, get ready for working on this project. And by the way, here's a wiki, and here's your instructions. On average, 4 days later, if you had neither quit nor killed a teammate, you were done with the install and you were ready to start writing software. If it was a brand new project, it would take the team approximately 2 weeks to get the basic infrastructure up and running and proper. So we launched Skeletor. Skeletor is it's an internal tool. We are actually now looking at open sourcing this. And it does a number of things, but it allows you to get a project up and running very quickly. Effectively, you go to the Skeletor GitHub repo on our internal Git repository, you clone it, and boom, you have the basic platform for any application. So baked into this is load balancer heartbeat checking, log file rotation and archival, Splunk integration, deploy recipes, system health metrics, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that stuff that we need is just there for you, and it's all integrated and works and is standardized. And we have Rails, Rack, Java, Clojure, and Node versions of Skeletor. So if you are looking at one of these sets of tooling for your project, because it's the right tool for the problem that you have, off you go, right? So we took that startup time from weeks to literally, 30 minutes. Then, as we saw, there was a lot of issues with management. And so we instituted manager training. So everyone went through manager training. Of course, one round of training isn't necessarily enough, but it's a start. So then we brought in COHAA, J-H-A-N-A. Is anybody here familiar with COHAA? What they have, what they do? So COHAA is a website, and you can, I don't know what the licensing cost is. It's not exorbitant. But it is full of really good management advice. Everything from how do you do a one-on-one to how do you give redirecting feedback, how do you give reinforcing feedback, how do you handle this type of situation, how do you handle that type of situation. And so now there's a resource for people to actually go look through, go look at, and then we're doing another round of manager training. Onboarding cohorts. So there's a couple things that we did here. First of all, we actually introduced onboarding. So when you join Groupon now, there is a series of courses that you go through before you actually join your team that introduce you to, what's the platform, how do things work here, how do we do this, right? Where, who do you talk to when you, when you need a budget approval, or all of that type of stuff. But then everybody that joins in the same basic time frame goes through this class together, and we create a little group out of that. So now you have a group of peers that all start at the same time, that all learn this stuff at the same time. And as they disperse throughout the organization, you've got friends throughout the organization that you can actually reach out to and talk to, you can share experiences with. We actually bring them back together a couple of weeks after onboarding for a little party, and then we encourage them to continue that practice, right? So we're building connection here as well as excellence with the onboarding cohorts. So we are working with teams now to basically, so it's inboarding, right? We are working with, like each team should have within their team, so here's the repo, here's the rules of the road for our team, right? So if we have standards for what we consider to be idiomatic Ruby, and that's our standards for this code base, we expect you to apply to them, that should be in your README. And then if there's anything else special about that team. So we're trying to get each team to actually have some kind of an introduction path for folks that join, as opposed to sit here, there's your story, and figure it out, right? Buddying people up. So when you join a team, you get a buddy. So there's someone on that team that is actually kind of dedicated to making sure that, if you don't know, you know that like it's okay to interrupt this person. They're committed to helping you, inboard on this team. We launched interest leagues. So interest leagues are about autonomy, connection, and excellence. This was really simple, right? So here's what happened. In Chicago, there was a group of people who would get together and would talk about Clojure. They'd do a kind of a lunch thing. And in Palo Alto, there's a group that talked about Java. And in whatever office, there was a group that talked about what it's like to be a front-end developer and what our standards should be. So these groups existed, but they were kind of tiny pockets in various offices. We said, well, this is actually a really good idea. Let's just give them a platform. So we branded it Interest Leagues. So now you are a member of a league. As a member of a league, we're designing logos for the leagues. You can get a little sticker, put it on your laptop, maybe something to put on your track jacket, because everybody at Groupon after their first year gets a track jacket, right? So now there's a little bit of kind of membership that goes along with this, right? And we're providing some support. Hey, here's some tools that you can use to help get new ideas out of the group. Here's ways that you can work better together. So we introduced Fist to 5, we introduced collaboration contracts, we introduced parallel thinking, do some training on that. But the most important thing I think about the interest leagues is this is where our standards come from. These are the groups that will ultimately decide. The Java League will discuss, because they think it's important, which dependency injection framework we should use, if any. And they will debate that amongst themselves, and we will help them with that. We will facilitate the conversations. And then when they've said, yeah, you know what, we all agree on this, this is what we should do, then we spread that throughout the organization. And part of the benefit of this is the leagues are made of people who are all over the organization. And they're hands-on keys individuals. These are actual engineers. So as it's being spread through the organization, there is someone or someones in your office who is involved in helping to actually make that decision. Maybe there's even someone on your team who is actually involved in helping to make that decision. And if you want to be a part of making these decisions, you simply join the league and get involved. We launched GeekOn. GeekOn is an internal hack fest. We've done 3 or 4 of these now. Something that what we found was, so this was by the way the GeekOn World Tour logo. So 2 GeekOns ago, we actually did, it was the first worldwide GeekOn. And so what that means is for basically an entire week, we closed down all of engineering. And everyone across the world gets involved. Anybody can submit an idea. We have basically one rule. If you can squint at it and see Groupon, it's good enough for us. So you're not going to use GeekOn to write your spouse's small business AR package or I don't know, whatever, right? It's got to be something that actually fits somewhere within the Groupon framework. But it's really, if you can squint at it, that's good enough. So an example, a couple of GeekOns ago, a team wrote a mobile app, because they wanted to actually work with mobile apps, that was effectively Space Invaders. Well, how does Space Invaders relate to Groupon? Well, the aliens were the cat in the spaceship. And marketing loved the idea and actually launched a campaign around it. Right? So if you can squint at it, you sign up for the team that you want to work on. You work on the project that you want to work on. We have a keynote that happens, and then we have the Hack Fest that goes on for several days. Then at the end, there's presentations. All the teams can do presentations. And we actually have folks can vote on the presentations, which ones they liked the most, which ones they didn't like, et cetera. And then based on all of that, we do a Shark Tank where senior vice presidents actually see these presentations and talk to the teams that created these ideas and often opt to fund one or two of them to actually become something more within the organization. And sometimes it's a product idea. Sometimes it's something that we're going to actually add to the product offering. But sometimes it's just an internal productivity tool or something else that's just kind of cool that the world's not going to see, but it's going to help us, right? So this is kind of our answer to the 20% time, if you will. But again, this actually speaks to autonomy. You can choose what team, you can choose what project, connection, and excellence. Some folks use Geekon to just clean up code bases, oftentimes not their own. Right? I've got to interact with that team's code base, and I find it really frustrating. So during Geekon, I'm just going to basically write tests around it and clean it up. Here's one of the projects that actually came out of. It's going to switch. There we go. Here's one of the projects that actually came out of Geekon. It's called GStack. This was done. This is basically Stack Overflow, but it's internal to Groupon. I don't even know what the questions are here. Oh, so this one specifically is a post about keyboard shortcut Mac. I don't know what this is about. But you can go to GStack and you can do a search and find information, or you can submit a question. Hey, how do I actually deploy this code into this environment? And someone can come and answer that for you, and you can say, oh, hey, I like that answer, and other people can vote it up. Yes, it turns out that Stack Overflow has an open source version, and we could have implemented that, but it was Geekon, right? Why wouldn't we build our own? And I think, I'm not positive about this, I think that this is actually written in Clojure. And so they actually wanted to write a full-scale web app or something, in nothing but Clojure. So hence, then that's where it came from, right? Oh, and by the way, so GStack, every once in a while, someone is awarded the rubber duck. And the rubber duck, how many of you know what that even means, right? So I had heard this originally as an internal story at Groupon, and then I later read it as a story that had happened elsewhere. But regardless, basically what ended up happening is this individual starts at a company, and they're not sure how to get certain things done. And so they'd be sitting at their desk and be like, well, how do you do this? How do you do this? And they would go and they would ask someone. And they felt bad asking people for, all of this information. And this individual discovered that there was a rubber duck on their desk that they had brought with them. And they discovered that if they actually talked to the duck, if they said, well, so how would I do this? And then they would explain to the duck how they think it should work and where they think they should look and whatnot. 75% of the time, they'd answer their own question. And so the Rubber Duck Award is for someone who submits a question and then later posts the best answer to that question. We built the Love Monster. Love Monster is one of my favorite things. So the Love Monster started, and this is actually a beta version of it that's showing on the screen here, because I didn't want to show some of the internal stuff. But the Love Monster started as kind of a side project, Geekon project. A couple of teams that actually were, I think, Java developers that wanted to learn Rails. And said, okay, well, what's something we could do in this? And what happens is I go to the Love Monster, and I put in your email address, and I say, hey, thanks for your help yesterday getting my machine configured. And the Love Monster just sends you a little email that says, hey, you just got love from Doc. Thanks for helping me with my machine yesterday. Right? And then we expanded it where you could actually put in a longer message. You could make that longer message private. So all this was a simple way of saying thanks to somebody. And it just kind of grew and grew and grew. And now on a daily basis, there are hundreds of loves that are sent across the organization. It leaked out of engineering. People found it in marketing. People found it in sales. People found it all around the organization. HR now uses it to welcome people to the company. And we're actually building additional features around it. But there's no team dedicated to this. And there's all these feature ideas. So we said, okay, well, how are we going to solve this? So we organized the Love In. And the Love In is all volunteer. It's evenings. And people come and they just dedicate their time to building new features for the Love Monster. So Love Monster today has this screensaver, which is basically a browser plugin that when you run it, all the love pops up in these little hearty bubbles and it gets bigger and then they explode and go away on the screen. It has HipChat integration. So you now have, there's a HipChat bot that you can just basically, in HipChat, somebody says something, you're like, oh, that's awesome, bang, love, put their email address and the reason, and it goes to the Love Monster. We've got reporting capabilities. So, but this all just came out of GeekOn. And this, you know, obviously autonomy and connection, right? So the autonomy, I can send to anyone and thank them for, you know, for something that they've done. And obviously connection, you know, connecting people to one another. And we're starting to see love that actually goes across organizational boundaries, across office boundaries, et cetera. We launched culture clubs. Culture clubs this was another thing that already existed, and all we did was give it a platform. So there were groups of people in an office who would say, you know, it'd be really cool if for Valentine's Day we just hung decorations all over the place. Or, you know, let's do some kind of a Halloween party. Everyone, we can do like a potluck thing and everyone can like do a Halloween costume contest, right? So we got money together and actually gave these clubs some funding so they could do something, you know, a little bit more, and then gave them a platform to communicate with one another. So the group of people in Palo Alto that do something can actually tell the people in Chicago, hey, we tried this and it worked really well, and vice versa. They've actually started coordinating events across offices. So now multiple offices on a particular day will all do the same event, maybe at the same time, maybe kind of across the time zones or whatever. But it's just a way for people to actually get together, have a little bit of fun. Valentine's Day, Valentine's Day we showed the Love Monster screensaver, obviously, and bought everybody a cupcake. So quality stuff, what do we do here? Readiness reviews. So readiness reviews, one of the challenges that we had, and a lot of organizations have this, is there's a reason that you have all of these checks around code deploys, right? You want to make sure that it's adequately tested. You want to make sure that the rollback plan is there. You want to make sure that the database isn't going to get corrupted. You want to make sure, you know, blah, 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 right? And so we put all this procedure and process in place to make sure that we're safe. You know, did QA sign off? Did. But what happens is it just gets slower and slower and slower and harder and harder and harder. And small changes can't happen now because the cost of that small change is just far too exorbitant. And so changes start to get further and further apart, which means that they're harder, which means the risk is higher, right? We all kind of know this story. So how do we address that? Well, what we did was we said, okay, let's take a look at all of these various teams. Let's create a checklist of things that we expect you to have in your code base, things that we expect you to have for a deploy. And as you achieve those ends, you start off, everyone starts off with a red rating. And a red rating means that you have to go through all of the checks every time you deploy. But as you pass some of those checks, yeah, your documentation's good. Yes, you guys have reasonable rollback plans. Yes, you have, right? There's certain things that are kind of static that you know, right? As you pass those, you can move to yellow. As you have repeated successful deploys without issues and whatnot, and you're still managing this checklist, you can move to green. And as you move through these phases, there's less and less gates that you have to pass through in order to be able to move to production. So if you are green, you basically have a go. You got something done? You've got a good track record? Go ahead. Deploy it. We trust you. If you have an issue, you'll probably get kicked back to yellow, and there's going to be a few extra checks. But teams can now earn their way into, being able to move much faster. So not everyone is held to the same restrictions. Only those that probably should be are, and those that don't need to be are not. We had a lot of production outages really at the beginning of the year. And there was another call for, we've got to get standards in place. We've got to get some compliance. This whole lovey-dovey thing that you're doing is taking too long. And so we formed the Agents of Change. And the Agents of Change is a collective of, I'm going to say lead engineers in the organization, but I don't mean that from a titling standpoint. What I mean is and you know who these people are in your own organization. These are the folks that others just kind of look to. They've been around for a long time, or they've really proven themselves. And it doesn't matter if they're a Dev 2 or a senior muckety-muck dev or whatever the title is, they're kind of a go-to individual. And so we pooled them together. We said, listen, we want to work with our interest leagues, and we want to get these standards together. Can you guys help us move this forward at a faster pace? And can you guys help us to make some of these decisions? And so the Agents of Change are now helping to move the standards conversations forward. Because remember, these leagues, this is, once a month we get together for lunch and we chat about things, right? And so we've got a team that is now working to actually help move that stuff forward at a faster pace. What about some stuff for the individuals? Because a lot of stuff that we've talked about has been kind of about process or whatnot. We have the personal growth benefit. Personal growth benefit was launched last year in the US, and this year is a global benefit. Every engineer in the organization has $1,500 that they can spend however they want on personal growth. Conferences, books, online courses, certifications, whatever you think is of value to you and your role in the organization, you've got $1,500 to spend at your discretion. If travel is involved, coordinate with your team and talk to a budget approver, because travel is not a part of this, right? So if you want to go to a conference and the conference is $800 and your travel is an additional $1,500, comes out of a separate budget. When you're done with that conference, you have $700 left in your personal growth benefit budget. We actually have, just to give an example of how this is used, right? Obviously, conferences and that stuff is really clear and easy. I found out last week that there are engineers in Berlin who are using this for English lessons so that they can communicate better with their counterparts in the US. And just this week, we launched the GEMS program, Groupon Enrichment and Mentoring. And so what we've done is, this is a mentoring program for engineers. It's all opt-in. You can sign up and say, I want a mentor. Relatively short form. What do I want the mentor for? What am I looking for out of this relationship? How often am I willing to meet? And then, who are 3 people that I would like to actually have as a mentor? You can also sign up as a mentor. In another week, we will take all of this information and we will actually do the matching and pairing. Our goal is that your mentor is not in your immediate reporting structure, so that as a mentee, you can freely say things like, dude, I totally hate my manager. And that can't blow back on you, right? And then we're actually getting ready to launch something like this for our managers as well, but we wanted to start with the engineers and get a pilot going and see how this is working. And this is actually patterned after a program that we already have at Groupon for mentoring women across the organization. So Women at Groupon, this is one of our internal interest groups, has done mentoring programs quarter after quarter and has been refining this. They've had great success with it. So we just basically took their model and are now applying it in engineering. So it's a long journey. These are first steps, right? Things are getting better. As we look at the engineering check-in, we can see that things are getting better. As we do interviews with folks, we can hear that things are getting better. As we look at the outages in the organization, we can see that those are happening fewer and fewer. In terms of retention, in terms of actual attraction, I don't know if we're having an impact or not, but I can tell from the data that we're actually collecting that things are getting better in the organization. I kind of want to, as we look at this, there's a few, we talked about autonomy, we talked about connection, we talked about excellence, right? You can influence culture from the top. And I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to do. I think setting the vision for the organization and heading everyone in a particular direction is extremely valuable. I think articulating the values of the company is something that's absolutely worthwhile. It's something that's actually essential for an organization to be able to pull together. I think even identifying what are the core competencies that you want people to display, right? So Groupon, one of ours is a bias for action. We would rather that you take action and make something happen than wait to get permission. We're okay with that, right? But I don't think that you can push culture onto an organization. I don't think that you can actually create culture. So the title of this talk is Creating a Global Culture. It's a bit of a misnomer, right? I think actually what happens is you need to discover what's already there. You need to look around and find out what's going on. You need to talk with people. If people are disengaged and uninterested, it's not because of something about them personally. It's something in the system. It's something in the organization. It's something that can actually be addressed. Find pockets of excellence. Find places where something good is happening. Give it a platform and spread the word, right? You're not actually creating culture. You're uncovering it. So if you think about this role, if you think about making this happen in an organization, don't look at yourself as an architect. Look at yourself as an archaeologist or maybe an anthropologist. Thoughts? Anything from the audience?
So, all the, you mentioned that you have $1,500 that every employee kind of gets. You guys also have tuition reimbursement, things like that as well?
As of now, we do not. We do have some folks that are using that money to go towards college classes. Okay. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So each location does kind of their own thing, but once we identified, hey, look, this is happening in some locations, first we went to others and said, hey, we think this is a good idea. Is there anyone here that's interested in this? And by the way, if you notice, everything that I'm talking about here is having people opt in, right? Even the agents of change, we identified who those folks were, but then we asked them, are you interested in this? Is this something that you think is worthwhile and would be able to commit yourself to? And if they say no, then we don't do it. So every office then kind of started their own. And now we've given them, hey, you guys should all talk to each other. By the way, this budget is available for, all of them. It works out to X amount per office, on a monthly basis. And we encourage them to actually talk to one another about what is it we're doing and coordinate, so that offices are doing the same thing at the same time on occasion.
So what's the threshold value you see because you encourage people to talk to each other?
Oh, I understand. Okay, so I mean, the primary is basically just letting them know that the support is there, right? When I talk about a platform, it's basically that, hey, we've got some money here, and you are supported in your efforts. And so then a lot of it is just, person-to-person communication. We do happen to have Skynet, which is our internal, it's our intranet. And it's based on Jive. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Jive. We've modified it, I think, quite a bit. But that is a social sharing platform. So there are places on Skynet for the leagues, for and you can actually submit ideas there and have conversation there, et cetera. So as a actual technical platform, Skynet would be what we'd use. Yeah.
So I like your analogy, your analog of saying archaeologist as opposed to architect. And I think it's apropos. My question for you is, so you've got all these disparate cultures, right? So you went out around acquiring people, and hopefully the crowds are very different. Some maybe not so much salary. But where they are, you try to unearth that culture and go to places. Over here. And to what extent, as you try to influence or create a global rebound culture, to what extent do you go in and, like, so you can't make your culture change, but yet, as you unearth their culture, it is really different than the one you have in view
For the longer term?
yes, so how do you move them towards
Right. So the question fundamentally is I get the archaeologist concept, right? But as you go to different organizations, different areas, and you find that their culture has elements of it that are significantly different from what you aspire to, how do you actually deal with that? There is some direction that's going on here, right? When we actually launched this group, sat down with the CEO of the organization, sat down with the SVP, whom I report to, and other members of the leadership team, and said, this is what we're looking to do. And we talked about what do we want this to look like. And to set that stage, I actually shared the Netflix slide deck, the Spotify video, the Valve employee handbook, because it's just crazy. And so, look, these are things that influence our thinking. These are things that are inspirational for us. And then we talked about where do we want to be, what do we want this to look like, right? These small, self-organized, autonomous teams that are, that work well together, but are, able to get work done in a very independent fashion. So there are folks that don't agree with that vision at all. There are folks that don't think that that's where we should go. And I'm not sure exactly how it's going to play out. My expectation is that there will be people who will opt out as momentum heads in a particular direction. Before we do this, one of the things I did before we did this, so we did all these interviews with engineers, and I found some really, really common things, which was really interesting. Because in the beginning, a lot of it was about like that office, right? Oh, well, this office cares about quality, but that office doesn't. And as you went to each office, what you discovered was that's not really true. Everyone cares about quality. Every one of the engineers had the same fundamental, we need to do better at testing, we need to do better at quality, we need to do better at. The differences were in the way that they were being led, or the way that they were being managed, or the way that they were dealing with the system that they were operating inside of. So some were digging their feet in and insisting that, nope, it's going to be quality no matter what. And some were saying, okay, these are the sacrifices we need to make in order to hit some end, right? But I found that the engineers were actually much more aligned than they even thought that they were. And that's actually helped. So some of this is more of a, the management training and leadership training will filter out some who just don't buy into these concepts.
Journeys all across the globe, doing all these engineering engines, do you find any areas, because it's such a rapidly growing space, that certain departments or engineering departments weren't aligned to your vision, or aligned to the talent level you're expecting, or aligned culturally to establish? And so, like, how do you measure and
We do have so as we traveled around and we find that there were areas where maybe the talent wasn't up to our standard, or people just simply weren't aligned, or how do we actually deal with that? There are cases where that is true. I think there are some offices that are a little bit more of an island unto themselves. One of the things I think we have that's an advantage, almost, I won't say it's accidental, but because we were a startup, it attracts a certain type of person. And because everyone that we acquired was a startup, it attracts they attract a certain type of person. And so just just that in and of itself means that for the most part, many of the folks that we have are, they tend to be a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more willing to take a risk, a little bit more, kind of forward thinking, how can I do something new? So that's been very advantageous for us. So it hasn't been as big of a problem as I thought that it might be. And again, in those cases where I think we have these small pockets, it's much like we'll find there are some managers that will eventually opt out. There are going to be engineers that eventually opt out, and ideally there will be those that that aren't there yet that opt in. And it's a weak answer. I feel it was. Back here.
What are some of the recruitment challenges that when you ramp up and get employees to have
So what were some of the recruitment challenges as we ramped up that fast? Well, a lot of the growth was through acquisition. So in a day we would add 100 bodies to the team, right? Just buy that company, boom, there we go. Then from a recruiting standpoint, yeah, I think some of the issues that we had were like in Chicago, especially. We had snagged a lot of the really solid talent, and those that we had not yet picked up were, very happy where they were and weren't necessarily interested in working for a large organization. We had a period there where it was hard to recruit in Chicago, and people started to see us as we moved away from Rails. There's a kind of a step back from the community as people were waiting to see, like, okay, well, if you're not doing Rails, which is, by the way, totally not true. We have a ton of Rails, and we will for quite some time. We're building new stuff in Rails all the time. But people kind of step back to wait and see, like, whoa, what are they doing? Are they actually going to commit to Node? What are they, nuts? What are they going to do? And so I think we got a drop in interest there. And then challenges in some of the other locations where we didn't have consistency in recruiting style or the way that we actually vetted employees. So one of the things we have, which I didn't mention, I should have actually, is the bar raiser program, and that is that we are training engineers how to do interviewing to assess for quality, to assess for talent, capability, to assess for some kind of a cultural match. Right, and once you are actually deemed a bar raiser, then you get someone else who wants to become one that you mentor over a period of time until they're ready. So we're teaching our people how to actually be more consistent across the globe in the selection and recruiting, the actual process.
One last question.
Yeah.
Did you get a lot of pushback from some of the senior management, like from a financial standpoint? And then how did you guys kind of quantify the value of doing all these things?
So I'm going to be honest with you on this one. So did we get pushback from senior management? How do we quantify this? I put together a budget. I had a couple people say, wow, you've really got some courage. Courage was not the word that was used. Because it was a relatively large budget for a department that had not existed before. And my SVP, so Shri, who's the head of engineering for Groupon, understood this need. The CEO understood this need. I was in a meeting with Shri. We were talking about how can we actually make this happen. And he eventually, we went through a couple different details, and then finally he just sat back in his chair. He looked at it for a second. He said, you know what? I have money over here that's dedicated for this. I'm not going to do that. And I'm going to take that money and I'm going to put it over here. You have a green light. So it ended up being a very easy conversation for me to have. And from my perspective, it's a show of commitment from the organization that, hey, let's really give this a try. Cool. Thank you very much.